The bass thumps a dull, predictable rhythm against my ribs, a cheap imitation of a heartbeat. I lean against the rented pillar, a plastic monstrosity trying to pass as Roman, and swirl the melting ice in my watered-down whiskey. Across the crowded, dimly lit room, Emma is holding court. Her laughter, a little too loud, a little too bright, slices through the manufactured cheer. She's surrounded by a gaggle of her new life friends, the ones who weren't around for the before, the ones who don't know. The DJ, a kid with too much gel in his hair and an ego that barely fits in his too-tight t-shirt, is taking requests. Or rather, he's taking her requests. It's her divorce party, after all. A celebration of her freedom. My stomach churns at the thought. Freedom from what? From me? From the vows we made? I watch her, a familiar ache tightening my chest. She's animated, her hands flying as she tells a story. She always was a good storyteller, good at spinning narratives. She looks happy. And that's the part that stings the most. The current song, some forgettable pop trash, fades out. The DJ fumbles with his laptop for a moment, a slight frown creasing his brow. He's looking for something specific. My cue. I'd slipped him a 50 and a scribbled note earlier. A simple request. A specific song. The opening chords of Ed Sheeran's Thinking Out Loud whisper through the speakers, soft at first, then swelling. Our song. The one we'd swayed to, lost in each other's eyes, on our wedding day. The one that was playing, almost 3 years later, when I walked into our living room and found her wrapped around James, my supposed best friend, their mouths locked in a kiss that was anything but friendly. Her head snaps up, her eyes, wide and suddenly stripped of their forced merriment, find mine across the room. The laughter dies on her lips. Her friends, sensing the shift, fall silent, their curious gazes flicking between us. For a beat, just a single stretched-out beat, the world seems to stop. It's just her and me, and the ghost of our first dance, the phantom of her betrayal, hanging heavy in the air between us. Her face pales. The color drains away, leaving her looking small and fragile under the garish party lights. The carefully constructed facade of her new life crumbles, just for a second, and I see the flicker of something else in her eyes. Regret? Shame? Or maybe just the shock of being so blatantly, so publicly reminded of what she threw away. A slow, cold smile spreads across my face. It's not a happy smile. It's the smile of a man who's carried a shard of glass in his heart for too long and has finally found a way to twist it. Let the music play, I think. Let her remember. Let them all see. This is her divorce party, and this is my little gift. It's funny, the things you remember. Not the big billboard moments, but the little ones, the quiet ones, the ones that sneak up on you and nestle into your memory like they've always belonged there. I met Emma in a goddamn pottery class. Me, Daniel's spreadsheet for everything, Miller, up to my elbows in wet clay. James, my best friend since kindergarten, or so I thought, had dragged me there. "Loosen up, Dan," he'd said, slinging an arm around my shoulder, his grin wide and infectious. "You're wound tighter than a drum. You need some art in your life, some spontaneity." He'd always been like that, James. Charismatic, persuasive. He could sell sand in the Sahara. And I, Brabri, Bora Bori, always, was the loyal sidekick, the steadfast friend, the one who'd grumble but eventually go along with his wild ideas. He was the kite, soaring on every whim, and I was the string, trying to keep him somewhat tethered to reality. Or maybe I was just the boring anchor. Hindsight's a bitch. The pottery studio smelled of damp earth and something vaguely floral, probably a scented candle fighting a losing battle against the clay. I was failing spectacularly at centering a lump of mud on the wheel. It wobbled, resisted, and then, with a final, splattering sigh, collapsed into a shapeless mess. "Having fun there?" I looked up, clay smeared across my cheek, to see her. Emma. Her hands, surprisingly strong and deft, were effortlessly coaxing a graceful vase from a spinning mound of clay. She had a smudge of blue glaze on her nose, and her dark, curly hair was tied back in a messy bun, tendrils escaping to frame a face that was, well, it was arresting. Not in a picture-perfect, airbrushed way, but in a real way. Her eyes, a warm chocoreto, chocolate, brown, sparkled with amusement. "It's fighting me," I grumbled, gesturing to my defeated blob. "I think it's winning." She laughed, a light, airy sound that seemed to lift the earthy heaviness of the room. "It's not about fighting it," she said, her voice soft. "It's about listening to it, guiding it." She wiped her hands on her apron, a canvas splattered with a rainbow of past projects, and walked over. "Mind if I—" I shrugged, a little flustered. "Be my guest. Maybe you can teach it some manners." Her fingers, cool and surprisingly gentle, covered mine on the clay. "Just relax your shoulders," she murmured, her head close to mine. I could smell the faint, sweet scent of her shampoo, something like vanilla and almonds. "Feel the rhythm of the wheel. Don't force it." And just like that, under her touch, the clay seemed to yield. It rose, smoothed, began to take on a shape that wasn't entirely accidental. It wasn't a masterpiece, not by a long shot, but it was something. A bowl. A lopsided, slightly wobbly bowl, but a bowl nonetheless. "See?" she said, stepping back, a proud little smile playing on her lips. "You just needed to get out of your own head." James, of course, sauntered over then, his own attempt at a mug looking suspiciously like a deflated football. Well. Looks like Danny's found himself a tutor." He winked at Emma. "I'm James, by the way, and this tightly wound individual is Daniel." "Emma," she replied, her smile widening. She didn't seem fazed by James's easy charm, which in itself was impressive. Most women were. That's how it started, with wet clay and a lopsided bowl. We started talking after that class. Emma was an artist, a painter mostly. She saw the world in colors and textures I'd never noticed. She'd point out the way the late afternoon sun hit the brick of an old building, turning it the color of burnt sienna, or the intricate patterns of frost on a winter window, a fleeting, natural masterpiece. She made me see things, really see them. I am an accountant. Numbers are my language. Order, logic, predictability, those are my comfort zones. Emma was not that. She was a whirlwind of creative chaos. Her apartment, a tiny walk-up above a bustling bakery, was a vibrant explosion of art. Canvases leaned against every wall, some finished, some works in progress. Jars bristling with paintbrushes stood on every flat surface. Books on art history, poetry, and obscure philosophy were stacked in precarious towers. It should have felt messy, overwhelming. But somehow it felt alive. It felt like her. "It's a bit much, I know," she'd said the first time I went over, a nervous flutter in her voice. "It's you," I'd replied. And I meant it. It was fascinating. A world away from my own meticulously organized, minimalist bachelor pad. Our dates were never conventional. Forget dinner and a movie. Emma would drag me to independent film festivals, where the movies were mostly in black and white and subtitled, and the plots made absolutely no sense to me. Or we'd go to late-night poetry slams in smoky, crowded basements where people poured out their angst in free verse. Sometimes we'd just walk for hours, Her narrating the city like it was a living, breathing character in a story only she could read. She'd ask me about my work, about balance sheets and profit margins, and her eyes would glaze over in a way I found endearing. "It's like you're speaking another language, Danny," she'd say, shaking her head, a smile playing on her lips. "But I like listening to you speak it." And I liked listening to her, about her dreams of having her own gallery one day, about the frustration of a painting that wouldn't quite come together, about the way a certain shade of blue could make her feel inexplicably sad, or a splash of yellow could fill her with an almost unbearable joy. James was around a lot in those early days. He was my best friend, after all, and he and Emma, they got on like a house on fire. They were similar, in a way, both spontaneous, both drawn to the bright, shiny, exciting things in life. He'd tease me about how Emma was finally breaking me out of my shell. "She's good for you, man," he'd said one night, after the three of us had been out for drinks. We were at my place, and Emma had just left. "You're actually smiling, without a spreadsheet in sight." "Ha-ha," I'd said, but I knew he was right. Emma made me feel lighter, like a part of me that had been dormant for a long time was slowly waking up. I remember one evening, about 6 months in. We were on the roof of her apartment building, sharing a cheap bottle of wine and watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange, pink, and violet. The city hummed below us, a distant, comforting drone. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, her head resting on my shoulder. I was thinking about how different our worlds were, how different we were. I was thinking about how, logically, it shouldn't work, but how, illogically, it just did. "I'm thinking," I said, choosing my words carefully, because I was a man who always chose his words carefully, "that this is nice." She lifted her head and looked at me, her eyes searching mine. "Just nice?" "No," I admitted. A rare surge of something un-Daniel-like, something almost poetic, rising in me. "It's more than nice, it's necessary." Her smile, then. It wasn't the amused smile from the pottery class, or the proud smile from her studio. It was something deeper, something that reached right into my carefully guarded chest and squeezed. "Yeah," she whispered. "Necessary." We fell in love like that. Not in a sudden, dramatic movie montage kind of way, but slowly, piece by piece, like two different colors bleeding into each other on a canvas, creating something new, something unexpected, something beautiful. I was the steady, grounding earth tones. She was the vibrant, unpredictable splashes of color. And together, we were making a picture that, for a while, I believed was perfect. I remember the exact moment I knew I wanted to marry her. It was a Tuesday. I know, thrilling, right? But that's me. I remember the details. It was raining, a miserable, gray drizzle that had been going on for days. I'd had a terrible day at work. A major client was threatening to pull their account. My boss had been breathing down my neck. I was stressed, irritable, and just wanted to go home, order takeout, and stare blankly at the TV. I walked into my apartment, and there she was. She had a key, of course. She was standing in my kitchen, which was usually a monument to stark functionality, and she was baking, in my kitchen. There was flour on her nose, a recurring theme I was learning. And she was humming, completely absorbed in kneading a massive ball of dough. The aroma of yeast and something sweet and cinnamony filled the air, a warm, comforting scent that instantly started to chip away at the armor of my bad day. "What's all this?" I asked, trying to keep the surprise out of my voice. Emma wasn't exactly what you'd call a domestic goddess. Her culinary skills usually extended to ordering pizza or, on a good day, making toast without setting off the smoke alarm. She looked up, her face lighting up when she saw me. "Surprise! I'm making bread, or attempting to. Mrs. Rodriguez from downstairs. You know, the sweet old lady with the yappy chihuahua. She's teaching me. Says every woman should know how to bake her own bread. Very therapeutic, apparently. She punched the dough with a grunt of effort. I think my therapist might disagree, but hey, free carbs. She was so completely out of her element, yet so utterly, determinedly her. And in that moment, watching her wrestle with that dough, a dusting of flour on her eyelashes, a smudge of something sticky on her chin, her brow furrowed in concentration, I felt this overwhelming wave of something. Love, yes, but more than that. A sense of rightness, a sense of home. This spontaneous, artistic, slightly chaotic woman who saw beauty in things I'd never noticed, who challenged me, surprised me, and made me laugh until my sides ached. She was the missing piece. The piece I hadn't even known was missing until she'd shown up and filled the space with her light, her color, her anabarata, anadi, clumsy, unskilled but endearing charm. Later that evening, after we'd eaten the bread, which, against all odds, was actually delicious, warm and crusty and perfect with butter, we were curled up on my sofa. The rain was still drumming against the window panes. Emma was sketching in a notepad, her tongue poked out in concentration, a habit she had when she was deeply focused. I watched her. The way the lamplight caught the curve of her cheek, the way her fingers moved so assuredly across the page, even though she'd been a disaster with the bread dough. And I knew. "Emma?" I said, my voice a little hoarse. "Hmm?" she murmured, not looking up. "Marry me." Her pencil stilled. She slowly lifted her head, her eyes wide, searching mine. "What?" "Marry me," I repeated, my heart suddenly hammering against my ribs like it wanted to escape. This wasn't planned. There was no spreadsheet for this. No pro-con list. Just this raw, undeniable certainty. I know it's sudden. And maybe it doesn't make sense on paper. We're so different, but... She put her sketchbook down. "But?" she prompted softly. "But I love you," I said, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating. "And I can't imagine my life without you in it, without your color, your chaos." A slow smile spread across her face, the one that always made my breath catch. "My chaos, huh?" "Yeah," I said, managing a shaky grin. "Your beautiful, wonderful chaos." She didn't say yes right away. She just looked at me for a long, silent moment. And then, she launched herself at me, her arms wrapping around my neck, her lips finding mine in a kiss that was flowery and sweet and tasted of promises. "Yes," she whispered against my mouth. "Yes, Daniel, 1,000 times yes." James was the first person I told, of course. We met for a beer the next day. "No way," he'd exclaimed, nearly spitting out his drink. "You, Daniel Miller, popping the question? I thought you'd need a committee and a 5-year plan for that." I just grinned. "Sometimes you just know." "Well, damn," he said, raising his glass. "To Daniel and Emma. Who'd have thought?" He took a long swig. "So, bachelor party. Vegas, right? We gotta do it right." Even then, it was about the next thrill for him. But I was too happy to care. Too lost in the glow of Emma's yes. Looking back, it's easy to see the cracks, isn't it? The little fault lines that were there from the beginning. Her need for constant stimulation, for newness, for more. My quiet predictability, my tendency to retreat into my own orderly world when things got too loud, too messy. Her easy friendship with James, their shared love of the unpredictable. But at the time it was just love. A love I believed was strong enough to bridge any gap, to weather any storm. A love I thought was forever. God, I was a fool. The wedding was Emma. That's the best way to describe it. not some stuffy, traditional affair that my mother had subtly, and not so subtly, pushed for. No, Emma had envisioned something different, something us. Or, more accurately, something her, with me happily along for the ride, a slightly bewildered grin plastered on my face. It was in a renovated art gallery downtown, a place with exposed brick walls, soaring ceilings, and abstract paintings that I mostly didn't understand but Emma adored. Instead of stiff floral arrangements, she had wildflowers in mismatched antique jars on every table. Instead of a classical string quartet, she'd hired a quirky acoustic band that played folksy covers of indie songs. It was perfect, perfectly Emma. She'd designed her own dress, a flowing bohemian creation with delicate, hand-stitched embroidery that probably took her months. When she walked down the makeshift aisle, a path strewn with colorful autumn leaves, towards me, I felt the air leave my lungs. She was radiant, not just beautiful but alive, incandescent, like one of her paintings, vibrant and full of emotion. James was my best man, of course. He stood beside me, a solid presence, looking uncharacteristically serious for a moment as Emma approached. He clapped me on the shoulder, a quick, firm gesture. "You got a good one, man," he'd murmured, his usual smirk softened by something that looked almost like genuine affection. Funny, the tricks memory can play, or the tricks people can. The vows were personal, heartfelt. I'd spent weeks meticulously crafting mine, writing and rewriting them until every word felt precise, true. Emma, naturally, had scribbled hers on the back of a gallery flyer that morning, a chaotic jumble of loving thoughts and inside jokes that made me laugh and tear up at the same time. That was us, my planned-out paragraphs, her spontaneous poetry. And then came the first dance. Emma had chosen the song, Ed Sheeran's Thinking Out Loud. A bit mainstream for her usual tastes, I'd thought, but she said it just felt right. "Listen to the words, Danny," she'd said, her eyes shining. "And darling, I will be loving you till we're 70, and baby, my heart could still fall as hard at 23. As the opening notes filled the gallery, a hush fell over our friends and family. I took her hand, her fingers cool in mine, and drew her close. The scent of her vanilla almond shampoo, now forever linked in my mind with love and later with betrayal, filled my senses. We swayed together, two halves of a whole, under the soft glow of fairy lights Emma had insisted on stringing everywhere. "Happy?" I whispered into her hair. She tilted her head back, her eyes meeting mine, full of a love so profound, so overwhelming, it felt like it could light up the entire city. "More than happy, Daniel," she breathed. "This is everything." In that moment, with her in my arms, the world felt right, simple, complete. I was a man of numbers, of logic, of tangible assets. But this feeling, this intangible, unquantifiable emotion, was the most real thing I'd ever known. I held her tighter, convinced that as long as we had this, as long as we had each other, nothing could ever truly go wrong. I was so sure, so devastatingly, naively sure. We moved into a small house a few months later, a fixer-upper with good bones, as Emma called them, and a yard big enough for the dog she was already campaigning for. Our worlds didn't just blend, they sometimes collided. My meticulously labeled spice rack now shared space with her collection of oddly shaped pebbles and dried flowers. Her art supplies gradually encroached on every surface, a vibrant tide of tubes, brushes, and canvases threatening to engulf my minimalist sensibilities. I'd find paint smudges on the doorknobs, on the dog we eventually did get, a scruffy terrier mix Emma named Picasso, sometimes even on myself. And I'd grumble, but secretly, I didn't mind. It was her mark on our life, on our home. It was a reminder that my world wasn't just black and white and shades of gray anymore. It was bursting with color. "You know," I said one Saturday morning, carefully wiping a streak of cerulean blue from the stainless steel toaster. For an artist, you're remarkably messy. Emma, perched on a kitchen stool, paintbrush in hand, working on a small canvas propped against the fruit bowl, just grinned. It's not mess, darling. It's creative expression. You should try it sometime. Might loosen up those rigid accounting muscles. She dabbed her brush at the canvas, adding a stroke of bright yellow. Besides, you love my chaos. And I did, most of the time. Our early married life was happy, genuinely happy. We had our routines. Weekday mornings were a flurry of me getting ready for work, Emma still sleepy-eyed, promising to get to her studio soon. Evenings were for shared meals, sometimes cooked by me, organized, recipe followed, sometimes by her, experimental, often involving too much garlic, always an adventure. Weekends were for exploring, antique shops, hiking trails, little roadside diners that Emma insisted had the best pie in the state. James was still a fixture. He'd drop by unannounced, usually around dinner time, with a six-pack of beer and some outrageous story about his latest dating misadventure or harebrained business idea. Emma seemed to enjoy his company, his boisterous energy. They'd banter and laugh, a rapid-fire exchange of wit and teasing that sometimes left me feeling like an observer in my own home. "You don't mind James being around so much, do you?" I asked Emma one night, after he'd finally left, leaving behind a trail of laughter and empty beer bottles. She was curled up beside me on the sofa, sketching. "Of course not, silly. He's your best friend. And he's fun." She looked up at me, a small frown creasing her brow. "Why? Does it bother you?" No, I said quickly. Too quickly? "He's just a lot sometimes." "He is," she agreed, a smile returning to her face. "But he means well. And he adores you, Daniel, you know that." I did know that, or I thought I did. James had been my brother in all but blood for as long as I could remember. He'd been there through awkward teenage years, through bad breakups, through family illnesses. He was family. Of course he was welcome in our home. Of course Emma liked him. Why wouldn't she? He was charming, funny, the life of the party. The first few years of marriage felt like settling into a comfortable rhythm. We were building a life. I was climbing the ladder at work, my methodical nature and attention to detail paying off. Emma was starting to get her art noticed. She had a few pieces in a local gallery, sold a couple of commissions. Her dream of her own space didn't seem so far-fetched anymore. We talked about kids, vaguely. "Someday," Emma would say, a dreamy look in her eyes. "But not yet. There's still so much I want to do, to see." I understood. Or I told myself I did. I was a planner, after all. A baby wasn't in my 5-year spreadsheet just yet either. There was time, so much time. But sometimes I'd catch a flicker of something in Emma's eyes, a restlessness, a longing for something more, something different. She'd get these moods, these sudden urges to escape. "Let's just drive," she'd say on a random Tuesday night. "No destination, just go." And sometimes we would. We'd pile into the car, Picasso panting excitedly in the back, and just drive until the city lights faded behind us and the stars blazed in the inky sky. Those were the nights she seemed most herself, most alive, free from the confines of routine, of expectation. I, on the other hand, would be silently calculating how much gas we were using and what time we'd need to turn back to get enough sleep for work the next day. "You're thinking too much again, Danny," she'd say, reaching over to take my hand, her thumb stroking the back of it. "Just be here, with me." And I'd try. I really would. I'd try to let go of the mental checklists, the internal calculations, and just exist in the moment with her. Sometimes I succeeded. Sometimes the pull of my own nature, my need for order and predictability, was too strong, We had arguments, of course. What couple doesn't? Usually about silly things. The cap left off the toothpaste, me. Her chronically losing her keys, her. My inability to understand why we needed another throw pillow when the sofa was already buried under a mountain of them, me again. But sometimes the arguments were about something deeper, about her feeling stifled, about me feeling like she didn't appreciate the stability I worked so hard to provide. It's just, sometimes I feel like I can't breathe, Daniel, she said once, during a particularly heated exchange. We were in the kitchen. She'd been an hour late coming home from her studio. No call, no text. I'd been worried, then annoyed. My carefully prepared dinner was getting cold. Can't breathe? I'd repeated, my voice tight with a frustration I was trying, and failing, to control. What does that even mean, Emma? I work my ass off to give us a good life, a secure life. Is that so suffocating? Her eyes flashed. It's not about the security, Daniel. It's not about the money. It's about passion, adventure. Don't you ever just want to scream, to break something, to do something completely wild and out of character? I stared at her. Honestly, no. The thought had never crossed my mind. My idea of wild was maybe having dessert before dinner. No, I said, my voice flat. I don't. I like our life. I thought you did too. Tears welled in her eyes. I do love you, Daniel, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. But sometimes I feel like I'm living in a beautifully constructed cage. A cage? That's what she'd called it. Our life, our home, the one I was so proud of, the one I thought was our sanctuary. The words hit me like a physical blow. We didn't talk for the rest of the evening. I slept on the sofa. Not because she asked me to, but because I couldn't bear to be near her, to feel the chasm that had suddenly opened up between us. The next morning she apologized. I apologized. We made up, the way couples do. We papered over the cracks. We told ourselves it was just a bad fight, a momentary blip. But the words lingered in the air, unspoken. A beautifully constructed cage. Looking back, that was a turning point. A small shift in the tectonic plates of our marriage. The first sign that the ground beneath my feet wasn't as solid as I'd believed. The first whisper of the earthquake to come, but I ignored it. I buried it under layers of routine, of work, of determined, almost desperate normalcy, because I loved her. And I still believed that love, our love, the love we danced to under the fairy lights, the love that was supposed to last till we're 70, was enough. It had to be enough. It didn't happen overnight. Marriages don't just explode without warning, despite what the movies show. Ours was more like a low leak, a gradual, almost imperceptible draining of whatever it was that held us together. The beautiful, wonderful chaos I'd fallen in love with started to feel just chaotic. And my steadfast predictability, which Emma once called her anchor, began to feel, I suspect, like a lid weight. The laughter didn't disappear completely, but it became less frequent, more forced. The easy silences we used to share, the comfortable companionship, were replaced by a different kind of quiet. One filled with unspoken words, with a tension that prickled at the back of my neck. Emma spent more and more time at her studio. Inspiration has struck, she'd declare, grabbing her bag, a feverish light in her eyes. Or, big commission, gotta focus. She'd come home late, smelling of turpentine, and an unfamiliar, slightly acrid incense she'd started burning. Sometimes she'd be exhilarated, full of talk about her breakthroughs, her new techniques. Other times she'd be withdrawn, moody, snapping at me if I asked too many questions. How was your day? I'd ask, a standard husbandly question. Fine, she'd say, already heading for the shower, or pouring herself a large glass of wine. The details, the vibrant narratives she used to share about her artistic struggles and triumphs, dried up. I tried to bridge the gap, in my own Daniel-esque way. I suggested date nights, the kind we used to have. Remember that little Italian place you loved? The one with the checkered tablecloths? Oh, I don't know, Danny, she'd sigh, flipping through a magazine, her attention already elsewhere. I'm kind of swamped right now. Or, maybe next week. Next week rarely came. I even tried to take an interest in her new art phase. She'd moved on from her colorful, semi-abstract landscapes to something darker, more aggressive. Lots of sharp angles, jarring colors. It's bold, I'd offered, standing in her studio, trying to find something appreciative to say about a canvas that looked like a paint factory had exploded. She'd just given me a tight, unreadable smile. It's how I feel. How did she feel? I didn't know anymore. And I was starting to realize, with a cold knot of dread in my stomach, that I was afraid to ask. James was around more than ever. He'd started collaborating with Emma. That's what they called it. He was a photographer, a hobby he'd picked up with his usual fleeting but intense enthusiasm. Apparently, he was taking pictures for a new series Emma was working on, or providing creative input. Or just hanging out. James gets it, Emma said once, when I'd tentatively questioned why he was at her studio almost every day. He understands the artistic process, the angst. The angst. Right. I, the boring accountant, obviously couldn't comprehend such lofty artistic suffering. I just paid the bills that allowed for said angst to be explored in a well-lit, heated studio. The thought was bitter, and I swallowed it down. I'd come home from work, and he'd be there, in our kitchen, laughing with Emma as they cooked together, something she rarely did with me anymore. They'd have inside jokes, their heads bent close together, a conspiratorial air about them. Picasso, our dog, seemed to like James more than me these days, too, wagging his tail furiously whenever James walked in. Traitor. Hey, Dan the man, James would boom, his smile a little too wide, his eyes a little too bright. Just whipping up some of Emma's famous, what is this, Em? It's an experiment, Emma would say, laughing, that light, airy laugh I missed so much, but which now, directed at him, felt like a tiny shard of glass in my gut. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. James was my best friend. Emma was his friend too. They were artistic types, volatile, expressive. This was normal for them. I was being paranoid, jealous, possessive. All the things I, Daniel, methodical and calm Miller, wasn't supposed to be. But the unease grew. It coiled in my stomach, a cold serpent of doubt. I started noticing things. The way Emma's phone was always angled away from me. The hushed conversations that would abruptly stop when I entered a room. The way she'd started dressing differently, a little more provocatively? Or was I imagining that too? Is everything okay with us, Em? I asked one night. We were in bed, a vast, cold expanse between us. She was reading, or pretending to. I could feel the tension radiating off her. She didn't look at me. Everything's fine, Daniel, just tired. Are you sure? I pressed, hating the needy, desperate tone in my own voice. Because it doesn't feel fine, it feels distant. She finally put her book down, her sigh heavy with an emotion I couldn't quite decipher. Annoyance? Resignation? Hi. We're just busy, Daniel, stressed. It'll pass. But it didn't pass. It got worse. The arguments became more frequent, sharper. Her beautifully constructed cage comment came up again, hurled like a weapon. I need to live, Daniel. Not just exist in your perfectly ordered, perfectly boring world. And what does a live mean, Emma? I shot back, the hurt making my voice raw. Does it mean staying out until 3 in the morning with God knows who? Does it mean treating our home like a hotel? Does it mean treating me like an afterthought? Maybe it does, she yelled, her face flushed, her eyes blazing, and that, more than anything, was like a punch to the solar plexus, because I saw in that moment that she meant it. The final few weeks before it happened, were a blur of cold shoulders, slammed doors, and a suffocating atmosphere of impending doom. I walked on eggshells, terrified of saying or doing the wrong thing, of pushing her further away. I was a man drowning, and the more I thrashed, the faster I sank. I remember thinking, with a strange sense of detachment, that this was it. This was how it ended. Not with a bang, but with a whimper. With the slow, agonizing death of 1,000 tiny cuts. And then came that night. It was our anniversary. 3 years. Not a big milestone number, but significant nonetheless. I'd booked a table at that little Italian place, the one with the checkered tablecloths she used to love. I bought flowers, her favorite stargazer lilies, their scent heavy and sweet. I even bought a small, stupid gift, a silver locket, something delicate and timeless, so unlike her current taste in chunky, aggressive jewelry. I was trying. God, I was trying to rewind, to go back to a time when us felt solid, real. She was supposed to be home by 6. At 7, I called her phone. It went straight to voicemail. Hey, it's Emma. Leave a message or don't. Whatever. Her new, too cool for school voicemail greeting. At 7:30, I called the studio. No answer. At 8, a cold dread had settled in my chest. The flowers sat on the table, their perfume cloying, mocking. The locket felt heavy in my pocket. James. I should call James. He'd know where she was. He always seemed to know where she was these days. I dialed his number, my fingers fumbling slightly. Yo, he answered, his voice sounding a little breathless. There was music in the background. Faint, but familiar. James, it's Daniel. Have you seen Emma? We were supposed to... It's our anniversary. My voice sounded pathetic, even to my own ears. A pause. Too long a pause. Oh, hey, man. No, haven't seen her. Did you try the studio? Yeah, I said, the serpent of doubt twisting tighter. No answer. The music in the background. What was that song? Huh, weird, James said, his voice suddenly sounding strained. Look, man, I gotta go. Something's, burning. He hung up. Something burning, right? The music. It hit me then, with a sickening lurch in my stomach. It was faint, tinny, like it was coming from cheap speakers, but it was unmistakable. Ed Sheeran. Thinking Out Loud, our song. I don't remember driving to the studio. My mind was a numb, buzzing void. I parked haphazardly, not caring if I was blocking someone. The lights were on in her studio, a soft glow filtering through the frosted glass of the door. The music was louder here, our song, seeping out into the cold night air like a poison. My hand was shaking as I reached for the doorknob. It wasn't locked. Of course it wasn't locked. Why would it be? I pushed the door open, and there they were. The scene is burned into my memory, a permanent, searing scar. Emma, my wife, her back to me. James, my best friend, facing her. They were standing in the middle of the room, near her easel. His hands were on her waist. Her arms were around his neck. And they were kissing. Not a friendly kiss. Not an oops, too much wine kiss. This was a deep, passionate, all-consuming kiss. The kind of kiss that leaves no room for doubt. The kind of kiss that shatters worlds. And our song, our first dance song, was playing. The soundtrack to my utter and complete devastation. They didn't see me at first. They were lost in their own sordid little world. I stood there, frozen, the flowers still clutched in my hand, the locket a cold weight in my pocket. My heart, which had been hammering in my chest, seemed to stop. My lungs forgot how to draw breath, and it was like watching a movie. A really bad, really cruel movie, where I was the unsuspecting fool about to have his life ripped apart. Then, Emma pulled back slightly, a breathless laugh escaping her lips. Her eyes, shining with an emotion I hadn't seen directed at me in a long, long time, were fixed on James's face. "You're terrible," she whispered, but her voice was full of adoration. Terrible. Yes, he was. They both were. It was James who saw me first. His eyes flicked over Emma's shoulder, towards the doorway. His face, which had been flushed with passion, went pale. His smile froze, then dissolved into a mask of horror. He tried to pull away from her, a jerky, panicked movement. "Daniel," he choked out, his voice a strangled whisper. Emma frowned, confused by his sudden change. She turned, following his gaze. And then she saw me. Her eyes widened. The color drained from her face, leaving it a ghastly, chalky white. Her hand flew to her mouth, a caricature of shock. The stargazer lilies slipped from my numb fingers and fell to the floor, their petals scattering like fallen tears. No one spoke. The only sound was Ed Sheeran still crooning about loving till we're 70, about hearts falling as hard at 23. The irony was a brutal physical pain. I looked at Emma, my Emma, the woman I had promised to love and cherish, the woman who had promised the same to me. And I saw a stranger with my wife's face, a stranger who had just driven a stake through the heart of everything I believed in. Then I looked at James. My best friend, my brother, the man I had trusted implicitly, and I saw a snake. A grinning, manipulative snake who had charmed his way into my life, into my home, into my marriage, and poisoned it all. The silence stretched, taut and unbearable, filled only by the goddamn music. Finally, I found my voice. It was a hollow, broken thing, unrecognizable even to me. "Our song," I said, the words barely a whisper. "You're kissing him. To our song." Emma flinched as if I'd struck her. Tears started to stream down her face, silent, glittering trails of guilt. James just stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. I wanted to scream, to rage, to smash everything in sight, to tear them apart with my bare hands. But I didn't. I just stood there, the ruins of my life crumbling around me, the echoes of our first dance mocking me. And then I did the only thing I could do. I turned around, and I walked away. Walking away from Emma's studio that night was like walking through a nightmare. Each step was heavy, reluctant, like my feet were encased in concrete. The sounds of the city, usually a familiar hum, were muted, distant, as if I were submerged underwater. Our song, their song now, faded behind me, but it echoed in my head, a cruel, relentless loop. I don't remember driving home. I must have, because I ended up on our sofa. My sofa now, I guess, staring blankly at the dark television screen. The flowers I'd bought, the stargazer lilies, were still on the coffee table, their scent now sickly sweet, suffocating. I picked one up, its petals soft and cool against my skin, and methodically, almost absently, began to tear it apart. Petal by petal, until all that was left was a mangled stem and a pile of fragrant debris. Numbness. That's the first thing I felt. A thick, protective layer of it, shielding me from the inferno of pain I knew was waiting just beneath the surface. It was a strange, detached sensation, as if I were watching myself from a distance, a character in a particularly bleak play. The key turned in the lock around 2 a.m. I didn't move. Didn't even breathe, I think. Emma walked in, her face pale, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen. She looked small, broken. A part of me, a stupid, treacherous part, felt a flicker of an scratch, slight feeling of pity. I crushed it. She saw me, and flinched, her hand going to her throat. Daniel. Her voice was a raw whisper. I just looked at her. No words. What was there to say? What platitude, what apology, what excuse could possibly touch the magnitude of what she'd done? Daniel, please, she said, taking a hesitant step towards me. Please, let me explain. Explain? My voice, when it finally came, was raspy, unfamiliar. Explain what, Emma? Explain how you systematically dismantled our marriage? Explain how you threw away 3 years, our vows, everything we built, for him? The name tasted like ash in my mouth. Explain how you could do that to our song? Each word was a lead weight, dragged from some deep, bitter well inside me. She flinched again, tears starting to spill down her cheeks. It wasn't like that. It just happened. It just happened? I repeated, a harsh, incredulous laugh bubbling up. It was a genuinely mirthless sound. No, Emma. It just happened is when you spill coffee on your shirt. It just happened is when you miss your train. This was a choice, a series of choices. You chose to lie. You chose to sneak around. You chose to betray me. With my best friend. She sank onto the edge of the armchair opposite me, her shoulders slumped. I know it looks terrible. Looks terrible? I stood up then, the numbness finally starting to crack. Anger, hot and sharp, lancing through me. It is terrible, Emma. There's no looks like about it. This is the goddamn definition of terrible. I was pacing now, my hands clenched into fists. I wanted to hit something. The wall, James, anything. What did you think was going to happen? Did you think I wouldn't find out? Did you think I'm that stupid, that blind? No, of course not, she sobbed. I don't know what I was thinking. I was confused. I was unhappy. Unhappy? I stopped pacing, staring at her. You were unhappy, so you decided to sleep with my best friend? That was your solution? Not talking to me? Not trying to work on whatever was making you unhappy? You just jumped into bed with him? The accusation hung heavy in the air. She didn't deny it. Her silence was its own confession. It wasn't just about sex, Daniel, she whispered, her gaze fixed on her tightly clasped hands. James, he understands me. He sees me. In a way that I don't? I finished for her, the words like acid on my tongue. Is that it? After all this time, I just didn't get you enough? It's not your fault, she said, finally looking up, her eyes pleading. It's me. I messed up. I ruined things, good things. Yes, I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion now. The anger had burned out, leaving behind a cold, desolate landscape. You do. You ruined us. There was a long silence. The only sound was her quiet, ragged breathing. What now? She finally asked, her voice barely audible. I looked at her, this woman who had been my world, my everything, and I felt nothing, just a vast, aching emptiness. Now? I said. Now you pack your things, and you get out. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with a fresh wave of tears. Daniel, no, please! We can fix this. I'll do anything. Fix this? I let out that harsh laugh again. Emma, this isn't a leaky faucet. This isn't a broken plate. This is shattered into a million pieces, and I have no interest in trying to glue them back together. I walked to the hall closet and pulled out a duffel bag, one we'd used for weekend trips, for happier times. I threw it at her feet. I want you gone by morning. She stared at the bag, then at me, her face a mask of despair. But she didn't argue. Maybe she finally understood. Maybe she saw the finality in my eyes. She picked up the bag and walked, like a condemned prisoner, towards the bedroom. Our bedroom. I didn't sleep. I sat there, on the sofa, listening to the sounds of her packing. The opening and closing of drawers. The rustle of clothes. Each sound was a fresh stab of pain. This was real. This was happening. She left just as the sun was beginning to tinge the sky with a pale, watery gray. She paused at the door, her face haggard. I am sorry, Daniel, she whispered, for what it's worth. It wasn't worth much, not anymore. I didn't watch her go. The confrontation with James happened a few days later. I'd been avoiding him, avoiding everyone, living in a self-imposed quarantine of grief and rage. He called. I ignored it. He texted. I deleted them unread. Then he showed up at my door. I opened it, and for a second, I just stared at him. James. My best friend. The man who had stood beside me at my wedding. The man who had betrayed me in the most profound way possible. Daniel, he said, his voice strained. He looked like hell. Dark circles under his eyes, his usually confident posture slumped. Can I come in? We need to talk. Talk? I said, my voice dangerously calm. I don't think we have anything to talk about, James. Please, man, he said, his eyes pleading. That same look Emma had given me. It was pathetic. Just 5 minutes. Let me try to explain. Against my better judgment, I stepped aside. He walked in, looking around the living room, his gaze lingering on the empty spaces where Emma's things used to be. Look, he started, turning to face me, wringing his hands. I know I messed up, royally. There's no excuse for what I did. No, I agreed, there isn't. Emma and it was a mistake, a huge stupid mistake. It got out of control. It got out of control? I echoed his words just as I had Emma's. Were they reading from the same script? You were sleeping with my wife, James. For how long? The question was blunt, brutal. I needed to know. I needed to catalog the extent of the betrayal. He flinched. A few months, he mumbled, looking at the floor. On and off. A few months, while he was coming to our house, eating our food, laughing with me, pretending to be my friend. The hypocrisy of it was staggering. Why? I asked, the word torn from me. Why, James? Of all people. My wife. My best friend, why? He finally met my eyes, and I saw a flicker of something I couldn't quite read. Defensiveness? Guilt? Or was it something uglier? I don't know, man, he said, shaking his head. Things haven't been easy for me lately, and Emma, she was there, she listened. We connected. You connected? I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. So you decided to connect your genitals as well? He winced. It wasn't like that, Dan. Not at first. We were just talking. About art. About life. She was unhappy with you. She felt neglected. Trapped. There it was again. Trapped. The narrative Emma had spun, and James, the valiant rescuer, swooping in to save her from the clutches of her boring, methodical husband. So, you thought you'd what? Save her? I sneered. Play the hero? Or did you just see an opportunity and take it? Because let's be honest, James, you've always been an opportunist. His face hardened. That's not fair, Daniel. Fair? I barked out a laugh. You want to talk about fair? You, standing there in my house after screwing my wife, want to talk about fair? I took a step towards him, my fists clenching. I could feel the rage, the violence I'd suppressed that night in the studio, bubbling to the surface. Get out! Daniel! Get out! I roared, pointing to the door. Get out of my house. Get out of my life. And if I ever see your face again, I swear to God, James, I will not be responsible for my actions. He stared at me for a long moment, his own anger flickering in his eyes. But then it died, replaced by a look of, was it shame? Or just fear? He nodded, a jerky, defeated movement. All right, Dan, he said quietly. I'm sorry for everything. He walked out, and I slammed the door behind him, the sound echoing through the suddenly too empty house. Sorry. They were both sorry. As if sorry could magically undo the devastation they'd wrought. As if sorry could mend a heart that had been shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The divorce was surprisingly quick. Clinical. Emma didn't fight me on anything. She agreed to my terms, signed the papers, her signature a spidery, hesitant scrawl on the documents that officially ended our marriage. We used lawyers, of course, communicated through intermediaries. The passion, the love, the arguments, the laughter, all reduced to sterile legal jargon and billable hours. I was methodical about it. I made lists, divided assets, closed joint accounts. It was like dismantling a complex piece of machinery, except this machine was our life, and every nut, every bolt, every wire I removed sent a fresh jolt of pain through me. There were days when the grief was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. Days when the anger was a wild, untamed beast, pacing the cage of my ribs, looking for an escape. Days when I just felt lost. Adrift in a sea of what-ifs and if-onlys. Emma moved in with James, apparently. I heard it through the grapevine, the small, interconnected world of mutual acquaintances who now tiptoed around me with pitying looks and hushed whispers. Good. Let them have each other. Let them build their new life on the wreckage of mine. The final decree arrived in the mail on a Tuesday. Fitting, I thought, with a bleak sense of irony. Our love story had begun with a proposal on a rainy Tuesday. Now, it ended with a sterile piece of paper on an equally unremarkable Tuesday. I, Daniel Miller, was officially divorced. Free. But it didn't feel like freedom. It felt like an amputation. A vital part of me had been violently severed, and I was left bleeding, raw, and irrevocably changed. The cage Emma had complained about? It turned out I was the one left rattling around in it, alone.